The wind had teeth that morning, and it bit through the wool shawl wrapped tight around Anna Lee Martin's shoulders. Her boots pressed into frost-hardened dirt as she walked, flanked by silence on both sides. No one spoke. Not her father, not the preacher, and certainly not the two soldiers who kept a respectful but guarded distance. In her hands she clutched a folded letter, creased and smudged from fingers that didn't stop trembling. The ink had run slightly where she'd cried on it the first night, the official agreement between the U.S. territorial governor and the Nakoni Comanche, land for peace, and her hand in marriage to seal the deal. Her father broke the silence as the camp's outline came into view, a spread of low, rounded lodges and smoke rising gentle into the gray sky. "It's only for a year," he muttered, not looking at her. "After that, maybe, well, things may change." Anna said nothing. She wasn't a fool. She'd heard the whispers, seen the fear in her neighbor's eyes back in town. If the treaty didn't hold, the Nakoni would burn them all out. If it did, they'd find some other reason to hate. Either way, her life was already over. The Comanche didn't come out to greet them. They watched from a distance, motionless figures, part of the land. When they reached the center of the camp, a single man stepped forward. Chief Kanehita was younger than Anna expected. Not a wild-eyed savage like the papers claimed. He wore a long coat trimmed with dark fur, and a necklace of bone that lay flat against his chest. His face was unreadable, like carved stone. A long scar ran from his left brow to the line of his jaw, just deep enough to catch a shadow. He said nothing as Anna approached. She'd imagined him snarling, shouting, maybe even laughing. But he just looked at her, calm, still, and terrifying in a way that didn't need violence. The preacher read the vows in a cold, clipped voice. Anna stood like a statue, hands folded, eyes lowered. When it came time for her to speak, her voice cracked once, then she forced it out. "I do." Kanehita's answer came in a low, steady tone. "So do I." There were no rings. No kiss. No celebration. Just silence. Afterward, her father gave her a stiff nod and turned away. The soldiers followed, leading the preacher. She watched them though until their shapes blurred into the wind and gray. A young woman, barely older than Anna, stepped forward and handed her a bundle, clothes, she assumed, and maybe bedding. She didn't smile. Anna followed her without a word, toward the small round lodge near the back of the camp. Inside, the air was warmer. A fire burned low in the center. Thick buffalo hides covered the ground. The woman gestured to a bedroll and left. Kanehita entered a moment later. Anna stiffened. He closed the flap behind him and removed his coat. "I won't touch you," he said plainly. "This marriage is a rope, nothing more. You are not my wife." "Not yet." Anna met his eyes. "What am I, then?" He considered. "A key?" "To what?" He didn't answer. She turned away and unpacked the bundle in silence. Inside were a comb, a wool blanket, a small knife, and a book, Leaves of Grass, by Walt Whitman. The book surprised her. She ran her fingers over the worn cover, then looked at the bedroll. That night, she couldn't sleep. The lodge creaked under the weight of the wind. Kanehita lay across from her, motionless, breathing slow and deep. His presence filled the space like smoke, quiet, but everywhere. She lit a small oil lamp, pulled out the journal from her satchel, and began to write. Day 1. I am Anna Lee Martin, daughter of Captain Walter Martin. I am alive, though I don't know what that means anymore. The chief is not what I expected. He doesn't speak unless there's need. But his eyes don't miss a thing. I think he's watching me even when he looks away. She paused. The fire popped softly beside her. I will do what's asked. I will keep the peace. But I will not let go of myself. I will write everything. Even if it's only to remind myself that I once had a voice. Kanehita didn't stir, but in the stillness she thought she saw his eyes open, just a sliver. Morning came heavy with frost. She stepped outside the lodge and found the camp already awake. Women tending fires. Children running barefoot, despite the cold. Men speaking softly around a smoking kettle. A few heads turned. None greeted her. She returned inside and found Kanahita tying a pouch to his saddle. He glanced at her. "Stay near the lodge," he said. "The land doesn't know you yet." Anna hesitated, then nodded. "I'll try." He paused at the doorway. "Try less. Watch more." Then he was gone. She sat by the fire, opened her book, and turned to the first page. But her eyes didn't stay on the words. They drifted to the door, to the cold light pouring through the flap, and to the memory of that unreadable face. The letter was still in her bag. She took it out and burned it in the fire, one edge at a time. No use holding on to a contract with ghosts. The first few days passed like walking a rope over a canyon. One misstep, and she wasn't sure who would push her first, the Comanche women or the memory of her own people. Anna rose early, tried to be useful. She offered to help grind corn, carry water, gather kindling. Every offer was met with a glance, sometimes a wordless shake of the head. One older woman spoke something sharp in Comanche. The younger one smirked. Anna didn't understand the words, but the tone was universal, outsider. She kept her hands busy anyway. If they wouldn't accept her, they'd at least see she wasn't useless. But still, no one came close. Even the children watched her like a strange animal, curious but wary, half expecting her to bite. Kanahita was absent most days, returning in the evenings, dust on his shoulders and silence on his lips. He didn't ask questions. He didn't explain. They shared meals in the quiet, broken only by the crackling of the fire. She'd learned not to expect conversation. If he had thoughts, he kept them buried like winter roots. One evening, he laid something beside her bowl before eating, an English book, worn and leather-bound. She turned it over, confused. Poems by John Greenleaf Whittier. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "You write. You read. This is from the trader's boy. He owed me." She didn't ask how Kanahita knew she wrote. She thought of her journal, tucked deep beneath her bedding. Her fingers tightened on the book's spine. "Thank you," she said cautiously. A slow nod. Then nothing more. The lodge was warm that night, but she couldn't sleep. She lay still, eyes open, staring into the dark. "I'm not afraid of you," she said aloud. His reply came after a long moment. "I know." She turned to face him. He was sitting upright, legs crossed, eyes reflecting the dying firelight. "Why read my journal?" she asked. "I wanted to know who they sent me." A flicker of heat lit her chest, shame, maybe. Anger, too. "You could have asked. I learn more when people don't know they're speaking." She almost told him to stay out of it. That it was private. But then she realized it wasn't. Not anymore. The next morning, a merchant party arrived from the nearby fort. 2 wagons, a handful of men with stiff vests and smiles too wide. Anna was called to stand beside Kanahita during the exchange. She recognized one of the men, Elias Conroy, a former deputy turned businessman. He barely looked at her, until Kanahita introduced her as his wife. Then Elias gave her a long, uncomfortable stare. "Didn't think they'd really go through with it," he muttered, mostly to himself. "She keeps the peace," Kanahita said flatly. "That is no small thing." Elias grinned. "Peace, sure. Until someone forgets who they married." Later, Anna walked the edges of the camp to calm her nerves, careful not to stray too far. She found a quiet slope overlooking the plains and sat there, notebook on her lap, hand frozen above the page. She didn't know what to write anymore. Everything she thought felt too loud. Instead, she stared at the horizon, where the grass bowed like a congregation under the push of the wind. She thought about what Elias said. Thought about the eyes of the Comanche women. About how both sides looked at her like a question no one wanted to answer. Back in the lodge, she sat near the fire while Kanahita smoked in silence. She decided to ask. "Do they resent me?" He took his time answering. "Some. They've buried many wives. And now they're told to trust a woman from the same hands that took them. I never held a weapon against them. Your name wears the same tongue as theirs." She nodded. It was a fair truth. There was no anger in his words, just fact. She reached into her satchel and took out the journal. Without looking at him, she set it beside his pipe. You want to know me? She said quietly. Read the rest. But be kind with what you find. That night, she dreamed of her mother's piano, the one they sold when the war came close. She could still hear the notes if she listened hard enough. When she woke, Kanehita was gone, but the journal had been moved. A feather rested on top of it, small, dark, unremarkable, except that it was new. Later that day, the younger Comanche woman who'd once turned away from her paws near the cooking fire, gestured for Anna to sit. She handed her a woven string and a handful of beans. No words passed, but it was enough. That night, Kanehita returned later than usual. He looked tired, worn by travel, but not weak. Anna handed him a tin cup of warmed broth. Their hands brushed briefly. You've read more? She asked. He nodded. You wrote that you hate the sound of men chewing. She smiled. Only loud ones. A pause. Then, to her surprise, he chuckled, low and short, but real. You also wrote you were afraid you'd forget your voice, he added. She looked into the fire. Still am. You haven't yet, he said, and then, with the smallest edge of softness, keep speaking. The fire popped, the wind whispered outside, and for the first time since her arrival, Anna didn't feel like she was sitting in someone else's home. She felt still. Centered. Not welcomed. Not yet. But noticed. And maybe beginning to matter. The boy's body was found at dawn, face down near the ridge trail, blood dried in a crescent across his throat. He couldn't have been more than 14. Anna saw him as they carried him through camp, wrapped in his uncle's coat. The quiet wasn't grief, it was restraint. Tight-lipped, spine straight, breath-holding restraint. Kanehita stood still as stone beside the body. His hands didn't shake. His mouth didn't move. But his eyes followed the red stains soaking into the earth like it was scripture being rewritten. No one wailed. No one cursed. But something shifted that morning, something Anna could feel in her teeth. She tried to bring water to the morning lodge. An older woman took the bucket without a glance, turned, and said something sharp in Comanche. Another voice behind her added a bitter edge, laughter with no joy. Anna backed away, face flushed. Her help wasn't wanted, not today. Later, she found Kanehita at the edge of the woods, his horse unsaddled beside him. She approached carefully. I'm sorry, she said. He didn't answer. They were hunting, he finally said. Not near the border. Not near town. And they were children. I know, she said. You don't, he said, turning to her. But you want to. That's enough. He mounted and rode off before she could speak again. By noon, 2 more bodies were found, older boys, brothers of the first. Same marks. Same message. But there were no tracks leading away from the site. Anna heard the women whispering it behind tents and fires. Whoever did it wanted war, but wanted to frame it clean. She went back to her journal that night, fingers clenched around the pencil so tight her knuckles whitened. They're trying to start something. Someone out there wants fire, and they're using blood to build it. Kanehita didn't return until the stars had wheeled high overhead. She didn't sleep. When he finally came into the lodge, he was carrying a small pouch and a strip of cloth stained with gunpowder. He sat across from her and set both items on the ground. 6 men. White. Small camp west of the basin. They left the boys there for us to find, then looped around. I know where they're going. She stared at the pouch. You're going to kill them? No, he said. Not yet. She waited for the explanation. None came. In the morning, word came from the town, a rider with a crooked arm and breath that reeked of whiskey. He came bearing condolences and a letter from the local fort commander, stating plainly that the army had nothing to do with the deaths. They suggested an investigation. They offered to assist in keeping the peace. Anna stood behind Kanehita as the message was read aloud. She noticed how he folded the paper twice before handing it back. The writer asked if he had a response. Kanehita simply said, "Tell them peace does not mean blindness." The man laughed. "They won't like that. I don't like dead boys." That night, he brought maps into the lodge. Laid them out beside the fire. Trails. Known patrol paths. Old scouting routes. He pointed to a spot near the western ridge. "They'll be here next," he said. "If we go in shooting, we give them what they want." Anna sat beside him, watching his hands move over the paper. "Then what do you do?" He looked at her. "I make it theirs to lose." The plan came slowly, spoken in measured words. He would send riders to intercept the vigilantes, not with arrows or bullets, but with evidence, trading goods marked with the town's own seal. A journal stolen from one of the bodies. A photograph, found in the pocket of one boy's coat, that showed one of the killers standing beside a town merchant. Anna listened without interrupting. This wasn't a war plan. It was a trap made of paper and patience. "You knew they'd come," she said. "I knew someone would," he replied. "People like your Elias Conroy don't leave peace alone. It costs them too much." She flinched. "He's not mine." "Isn't he?" Kanehita said, voice calm. "You came from their world. You carry it in your voice." "And what do I carry now?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You haven't decided yet." 2 days later, the camp received a gift. A messenger from the fort brought a shipment of flour and salted meat, part of a goodwill offering. But the meat was wrong, bitter, sour-smelling. Anna heard the word whispered between women at the fires, poison. No one died. They hadn't touched it. But the message was clear. The settlers had more than bullets in their belt. That night, she wrote again. "He doesn't rage. He sharpens. Every slight, every loss, becomes a tool. I used to think control was weakness. Now I see it's the most terrifying power of all." Kanehita read her journal that night without hiding it. He sat across from her and read while she stitched a torn seam in her coat. When he finished, he set it down gently. "Don't write about poison again," he said quietly. "Let them believe we didn't notice. You're playing a game." He nodded. "They think we can only fight with arrows. I want them to think that a little longer." She leaned closer to the fire. "And what happens when they realize you're smarter than they are?" His eyes met hers. Steady. Cold. "Then I stop playing." They said nothing after that. The silence was not heavy. It was a weight they shared. The scream didn't last long, just enough to wake the horses and send the camp into a low hum of confusion. By the time they reached the lodge, Anna was gone. No trail. No blood. No footprints in the hard-packed earth. Only her shawl, snagged on a fence post. Kanehita stood over it for a long time, fingers brushing the edge. He didn't speak. He didn't yell. He walked back to his tent, barked orders in a tone barely louder than a whisper. Men scattered. No one asked questions. She woke bound at the wrists, mouth dry, the world spinning with the steady sway of a wagon. Canvas flapped overhead, and the cold snapped at the holes in her boots. She didn't cry. Didn't scream again. The gag had dried blood where it had cut into her lip, but she didn't give them the pleasure of noise. 3 men. One drove. One sat beside her with a rifle. The other chewed tobacco and smiled too much. The one with the rifle called her treaty whore under his breath. The other one corrected him. "Not whore," he said. "Pawn. The kind you throw away once you've crossed the board." They weren't hiding who they were. They didn't wear masks. That was the part that scared her most. At night they camped light. Just a fire, no tents. They didn't bother to tie her down, just assumed she was too weak, too scared. She wasn't either. But she was smart enough to wait. The one called Burke slept with a pistol tucked in his boot. She didn't try for it. But she memorized where it was. Back at the camp, Kanehita didn't sleep. While the others scoured the ridge and followed blueprints that vanished in the brush, he sat with Anna's journal. He read every page again, then went through her belongings, one by one. A comb. A piece of lace. A letter with a broken seal. He studied it all as though she were a battlefield and the clues to her rescue were buried under her handwriting. The third morning, a boy returned with word. A trader had spotted a wagon moving west toward Fort Delaney. 3 men. No banners. No brands. Just dust. Kanehita didn't assemble a war party. He didn't raise the alarm. He rode alone. Anna counted days by the sun. On the 4th morning, the one called Everett leaned in and told her the plan. They'd leave her body just outside the Comanche border, scalp her, and let the army blame it on the tribe. He smiled like a man who just carved a notch in a gunstock. "I hope he comes looking for you," he said. "I'd like to meet the bastard." She stared at him, dry-eyed. "He's not what you think." "Sure he ain't," Everett said, standing. "If he were, you wouldn't be here." The irony would have been funny if it wasn't killing her from the inside out. That night, she saw a shadow on the hill, just a flicker near the edge of the firelight. One of the men stood to piss and muttered about coyotes. She said nothing, but her heartbeat quickened. Just before dawn, the rifleman turned his back to her to stir the embers. That's when a sharp whistle cut the air. One man turned. One fell. The third didn't have time to reach for his gun. Kanehita stepped from the dark with the quiet of a ghost, holding a drawn bow. He didn't speak. Didn't look at her. He moved straight to Everett, who was clutching his leg, a clean arrow through the thigh. "You talk too much," Kanehita said, and knocked him cold with the butt of his bow. Then he cut Anna's bindings. She didn't cry. Didn't flinch. She met his eyes and whispered, "You came alone." "You weren't lost," he said. "Just misplaced." She almost laughed. Her wrists bled, her lips cracked, and still she smiled. They rode in silence for miles. She didn't ask what would happen to the bodies. She didn't want to know. When they returned, the camp stood still as they passed. No one said anything, but the eyes that once looked through her now looked at her. Kanehita stopped at their lodge. Before she could go inside, he handed her something, a folded piece of cloth. She opened it to find her journal, undamaged, pages pressed flat. "I didn't know if I'd be bringing it back," he said. "You read it again?" He nodded. "I needed to know what was worth finding." She looked down. "And?" He met her gaze, quiet and steady. "Still deciding." That night, she cleaned the dirt from her hands and rewrote the missing pages. "They didn't take me because I was weak. They took me because I mattered. They wanted a symbol to burn. But they forgot that symbols cut both ways." She closed the journal and set it aside. Across the fire, Kanehita watched the flames, silent as always. But when she stood to lay down, he spoke. "Thank you?" "For what?" she asked. "For not dying." She sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat off his shoulder. "I was never going to die there," she said softly. "Not before I finished the story." The paper trembled in her hand, though the wind was still. Anna stood at the edge of the town square, her heart pounding against her ribs like a horse desperate to bolt. People stared, some with pity, some with contempt, others with the vague, distant curiosity reserved for disasters about to unfold. Kanehita had warned her. "Once words leave your mouth, they don't come back." "I'm not afraid of them," she said. He looked at her then, not with disbelief, but with something quieter. Something closer to respect. A week had passed since her return. The army had sent a liaison to discuss terms, as if her abduction had been a misplaced piece of mail. Kanehita said little during those meetings, letting silence stretch longer than was polite. Anna watched the officers squirm beneath it. She understood now that silence could be a blade sharper than any drawn weapon. What had started as whispers in camp had grown into fire. Someone in town had funded the men who took her. She'd heard the name in hushed tones. Elias Conroy. Of course it was him. Her father's former friend. The man who stood at every town meeting with a drink in one hand and promises in the other. He wanted war. War paid better than peace. She couldn't watch it happen again. A folding chair creaked under the weight of Sheriff Danvers as he adjusted his belt and nodded toward her. "We'll keep it short, Miss Martin." "It won't be short," she said calmly. She stepped onto the wooden platform, unrolled the crinkled pages of her journal, and began to read. Not with force, not with theater, just steady, even words. Her voice wasn't loud, but every syllable landed like a nail. "I was taken by 3 men who wore no masks and feared no punishment. They laughed about what they'd do to me. They knew the town would look away." A murmur stirred the crowd. A cough. A shifting of boots on dry ground. "They weren't just outlaws. They were hired. Equipped. Fed and sent with instructions. By men here. Not strangers. Not ghosts. Neighbors." Faces shifted. A woman near the back whispered to her husband. A child tugged at her mother's skirt, asking what the lady was talking about. Anna turned a page. "I wrote down names. Conversations. Descriptions. One of them carried a note signed by Elias Conroy. I gave that note to Chief Kanahita. He gave it to the army." Now the silence was heavier. Even the birds seemed to hush. She lowered the paper and let her eyes pass over the crowd. "You think I came back to speak for the Comanche? I didn't. I came back to speak for myself. Because if I let you believe they're the savages and we're the saints, then I become part of the lie." A man near the front, heavy-set and red-faced, stood up. "You calling your own people liars?" She didn't flinch. "I'm calling some of them cowards." He stepped forward, fists balled. Sheriff Danvers placed a hand on his chest. "Sit down, Jacob." Anna folded the paper. "They didn't kill me when they had every reason to. They protected me. Fed me. Let me speak when no one else would. They never pretended to be perfect. Can you say the same?" She stepped down. No applause. No shouting. Just silence, and 100 eyes trying to decide whether to hate her or hear her. Kanahita waited at the edge of the square, leaning against his horse, unmoving. As she approached, he looked at her the way someone looks at a fire that didn't burn the house down, but came damn close. "Did you say what needed saying?" he asked. "I said what I could live with." He nodded once, then offered her the reins. Behind them, someone muttered her name, soft and reverent. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. As they rode back through the dry grass, she felt something uncoil inside her. Not relief. Not yet. But something close. Later in the lodge, she added the final line to her entry. "Truth doesn't always win. But it always shows up. And sometimes, that's enough to change the direction of a storm." She closed the book and set it beside the fire. Kanahita watched her without speaking, then reached for it. "I wrote about you too," she said. He opened it, thumb to the back, and paused. She waited. Then his mouth curved, barely, but enough. "You made me taller," he said. "Only by an inch. Still counts." The wind outside had turned, and with it, the smoke from the fire curled west instead of east. The moon was red again, hanging low over the plains like it had something to mourn. Anna stood just beyond the lodge, fingers tucked under her shawl, watching its slow climb over the ridge. The wind was dry, curling around her ankles, tugging at the corners of her dress. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, but the night held steady, like it was listening. Kanahita didn't say anything as he approached. His steps were quiet, practiced. She only noticed him because the silence shifted in a way it only did when he was near. He stopped beside her, arms crossed, eyes turned toward the same sky. "It's red again," she said. "It remembers," he replied. She let the silence settle between them, not needing to fill it. They'd run out of small words weeks ago. What was left between them had no shape, no ceremony, just quiet understanding stitched from everything they hadn't said. The days had slowed since her speech in town. No raids. No retaliation. The fort had sent word through a courier, short, clipped language acknowledging administrative failings, and a promise of future transparency. Elias Conrad's store had been shuttered 2 days later, his name suddenly absent from the town ledgers. No one said he'd fled. But no one looked for him, either. It hadn't been victory, not really. But it had been enough. Anna had kept writing. The journal now carried pages stained with tea, corners bent from use. It had grown heavier, not from the paper, but from the lives it held. She'd begun recording the stories of the women who once turned from her. Names. Recipes. Fragments of songs hummed while skinning hides. Some of them had started talking to her. Some still didn't. But none ignored her now. She felt different. Not saved. Not redefined. Just real. I still don't know what I am here, she said. Kanehita glanced at her, his face unreadable in the moonlight. You are what you make. Nothing else holds. She considered that. And what about us? You're not a treaty anymore, he said simply. I wasn't ever just that. No, he said, but I needed time to see it. She looked down at the ground. Her boots were caked in dust, the hem of her dress frayed. Her hands were scarred in small places, where knives had slipped or fire had kissed her too close. They were working hands now. Honest hands. Hands that had built something. Do you still read my pages? She asked. Sometimes, he said. When I want to remember what silence hides. She smiled. You're in them more now. I know. They stood that way until the fire behind them dimmed, and the cold started to nip harder at their skin. He turned first, walking back toward the warmth. She followed a few steps behind. Inside, the lodge smelled of cedar and smoke. A pot hung low over coals, and her blanket waited, folded where she'd left it. Kanehita sat near the fire and opened a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. Inside was a piece of beadwork, unfinished, but carefully threaded. He worked slowly, precisely, hands moving without hurry. She sat beside him and pulled the journal into her lap. She flipped to a blank page and stared at it. You ever think about what would have happened if we'd said no? She asked. Yes. And? I would have buried more men. Maybe you too. But not peace. He shook his head. Peace doesn't survive on its own. It needs teeth. And witnesses. She wrote that down. When she stopped, he was watching her. You still try to make sense of it all? He asked. Only when I'm foolish. Then tonight? She closed the journal. I'm quiet tonight. He nodded, reached forward, and stoked the fire with the tip of a branch. The sparks danced upward, catching the edges of the lodge in a soft glow. I still think about that first night, she said. How I thought you were going to be cruel. You looked like someone expecting a cage. I was. I didn't have one. I know that now. There was no need to say more. She laid the journal aside and wrapped the blanket over her knees. He leaned back, arms behind him, his gaze locked on the ceiling poles swaying faintly with the wind. She knew he was thinking the same thing she was, not about where they'd started, but about the long, strange path that had led them here. Not love at first sight. Not even trust. Just two stubborn people who refused to let the world shape them without their consent. She reached over and took the unfinished beadwork in her hands. Tell me how to finish it, she said. Kanehita leaned in. His fingers moved over hers, slow, deliberate. You follow the pattern, he said. But you change one color. That way no one forgets who added the last touch. The fire cracked low, steady, like it was exhaling after holding its breath too long. Outside, the wind shifted again, and the red moon cast its light through the small gap in the lodge flap, painting the earth with the color of memory. She threaded the needle, pulled it through, and smiled.